One player wanted to go back to a team he'd already played for. That's it. That's genuinely how this whole thing started. And somehow, that simple decision turned into a 6-team, 10-player trade that touched a fifth of the entire NBA. I'm going to walk you through every single piece of it, because almost nobody watching the headlines actually understands how a deal this size gets built. 10 players, 6 front offices, cap mechanics most fans have never even heard of. Let's actually break this down, piece by piece. Let's start with the simple version, because underneath all the noise, this trade actually starts with one clean, easy-to-understand move. Chris Middleton agreed to a 3-year, $17.6 million contract with the Washington Wizards, signed as a sign-and-trade with the Dallas Mavericks. That's genuinely it, at the core. A 34-year-old veteran wing wanted to go back to a team he liked playing for, and Washington wanted him back too. Here's his backstory, quickly. Middleton spent 14 seasons built almost entirely around Milwaukee, where he made 3 All-Star teams and helped the Bucks win the 2021 championship, alongside Giannis Antetokounmpo, averaging over 23 points a game in that playoff run. The Bucks traded him to Washington at the 2025 deadline. Then Washington traded him again, this time to Dallas, as part of the deal that brought Anthony Davis to the Wizards ahead of the 2026 deadline. So by the time this new deal happened, Middleton had already bounced between 3 teams in under 2 years. A lot of movement for a player once considered one of the most stable, dependable veterans in the entire league. Now, here's where it gets complicated. This Middleton reunion got folded into a much larger trade involving the Detroit Pistons, the Memphis Grizzlies, the LA Clippers, the Milwaukee Bucks, the Mavericks, and the Wizards. 6 teams, 10 total players, moving all at once. As part of the same trade, Detroit sent Caris LeVert and 2 second-round picks to Milwaukee in exchange for Taurean Prince and Gary Harris. Washington sent D'Angelo Russell, a 2029 second-round pick, a 2032 second-round pick swap, and a 2033 second-round pick to Memphis. Dallas also tossed in a 2033 second-round pick to Washington, along with Middleton. And wrapped into the same overall trade framework were previously reported moves: John Collins joining Detroit, Memphis picking up Isaiah Stewart, and Dallas adding Santi Aldama Olimimama. The case for why this matters. We are looking into 3 pillars. Pillar 1, the domino effect. So why does one player's contract turn into 6 teams moving pieces around? The honest answer is that most of the NBA's biggest trades this time of year aren't really about basketball fit first. They're about the salary cap forcing teams to get creative. Dallas needed a way to complete the sign and trade for Middleton without breaking their own cap situation. Washington, in taking Middleton back, needed to create room and structure their books in a way that worked for a rebuilding roster. Once those 2 teams needed extra pieces to make their side of the deal legal under cap rules, other teams with their own separate needs, Detroit wanting John Collins signed a certain way, Memphis wanting size and depth in Isaiah Stewart, Milwaukee wanting a change of scenery reclamation project, all got pulled into the same trade machine, because it was more efficient to solve everyone's problems in one connected transaction instead of 5 separate ones negotiated over the following weeks. This is actually a pretty common pattern late in the offseason. Teams sit on unresolved cap situations, agents and front offices keep talking behind the scenes, and eventually somebody realizes that 6 separate headaches can be solved faster as one enormous, interconnected trade instead of 6 smaller ones. Pillar 2, what each team actually got. Let's go team by team, because this is the part almost nobody actually breaks down clearly. Washington gets Chris Middleton back, plus a 2033 second-round pick from Dallas. Middleton is coming off a season where he averaged just over 10 points, under 4 rebounds, and under 3 assists a game between Washington and Dallas combined. A clear step down from his peak production in Milwaukee, where his career averages sit at 16.1 points, 4.7 rebounds, and 3.9 assists a game. He'll be 35 for the entire 2026-27 season. Milwaukee gets Caris LeVert from Detroit, plus a 2027 second-round pick and additional lower second-round selections. LeVert is 31, and last season was rough for him. A career-low 7.4 points a game in 60 games for a number 1 seeded Pistons team. well below his career numbers of 13.2 points and 3.6 rebounds across 10 NBA seasons with 5 different franchises. Detroit sends out LeVert and picks, and receives Taurean Prince and Gary Harris in return, both established veteran role players, with Prince specifically shooting above 43% from 3 over his last 2 seasons. Harris, a 12-year veteran out of Michigan State, only played about 14 minutes a night in his lone season with Milwaukee, averaging under 3 points a game. But the real value for Detroit here isn't really the players changing hands. It's cap mechanics, which brings us to the next pillar. Memphis picks up Isaiah Stewart as part of the broader framework, adding size and defensive depth to their frontcourt rotation. Dallas, on their end, adds Santi Aldama, while also completing their obligations on the Middleton sign-and-trade. Every team in this deal walked away with at least one piece that addressed something specific on their roster. This wasn't a trade where 5 teams did favors for one. Pillar 3. The hidden mechanics nobody explains. Here's the part of this trade that's actually the most interesting, and it has almost nothing to do with who's a better basketball player. Detroit needed to pay forward Collins' new contract above the mid-level exception. Because the salary gap between Collins and LeVert was under $9.1 million, Detroit was able to simply use LeVert's outgoing salary to match Collins' incoming salary under cap rules, without having to dip into their actual cap space. That single mechanic let Detroit generate 2 separate trade exceptions in the process. A $15 million exception from sending Marvin Bagley or Isaiah Stewart pieces to Memphis, and a $5.2 million exception from a separate piece going to Dallas. Why does that matter? Because trade exceptions are basically banked salary matching room a team can use later in the season to absorb another player's contract without sending money back the other way. That single Collins-LeVert salary match let Detroit generate 2 separate trade exceptions in this same transaction. A $15 million exception created by sending Isaiah Stewart to Memphis, and a $5.2 million exception created by sending Marcus Sasser to Dallas. By staying over the cap rather than clearing space outright, Detroit also preserved its bird rights on free agent Kevin Huerter, whom they'd already agreed to re-sign, and kept their own mid-level exception intact, which they immediately turned around and used to add Isaiah Joe from Oklahoma City. That's 4 separate roster-building tools, 2 trade exceptions, preserved bird rights, and an intact mid-level exception, all generated from a trade that, on the surface, just looks like Detroit swapping LeVert for 2 role players. In other words, most of what looks like a trade for players on the surface is actually a trade for financial flexibility and legal roster-building tools. The players moving are almost a side effect of 6 front offices solving their own separate cap puzzles at the same time. Multi-team blockbusters like this aren't new. The NBA has seen genuine 4- and 5-team trades before, usually built around one star player changing teams and everyone else's pieces getting pulled along to make the math work. What makes this one stand out is the size. 6 teams and 10 players is an unusually large number for a trade that, at its actual center, is just a 34-year-old role player agreeing to go back to a team he already knows. That gap between the size of the headline and the size of the actual basketball decision at the center of it is exactly why this deal confused so many fans when it broke. Now, let's be fair to how the league actually works here, because there's a real case that this kind of complexity isn't a problem. It's smart business. First, every team involved got something they specifically wanted. Washington got a familiar veteran back. Milwaukee got a change of scenery player in LeVert, who's shown far more than he displayed last season. Detroit got Collins signed the way they wanted, plus real trade exceptions to use later. Memphis and Dallas both picked up players, Isaiah Stewart and Santi Aldama, who fit specific roster needs. None of the 6 teams walked away from this with nothing. Second, using trade mechanics like this is genuinely efficient. Solving 6 teams' problems in one coordinated transaction, instead of 5 or 6 separate smaller trades negotiated over weeks, actually saves everyone time and preserves more optionality, like Detroit's preserved bird rights and mid-level exception, than doing everything separately would have. Third, none of this is uncommon or improper. As CBS Sports pointed out when covering this deal, these kinds of maneuvers happen fairly often this time of year. This isn't some rare loophole, It's just how modern NBA front offices are trained to operate under the current collective bargaining agreement. But here's the honest pushback. For the average fan, none of that complexity actually changes who's better on the court next season. A casual viewer just sees 6 teams and 10 players and reasonably wonders what any of it has to do with actual basketball. That confusion is fair, even if the mechanics behind it are perfectly legal and, frankly, pretty clever. Before I get into the long-term verdict, if you're enjoying breakdowns like this, go ahead and hit subscribe. I break down the biggest trades and storylines in basketball every single week, including the ones that look confusing on the surface. Alright, so who actually comes out ahead here 2 years from now? Here's how I'd project this forward, team by team. Washington's side of this hinges entirely on what a 35-year-old Middleton has left in the tank. If he can still shoot near his career 38.5% from 3 and provide veteran locker room value on a rebuilding roster, this is a low-risk, reasonable reunion. It was never meant to be a star acquisition. It's a stabilizing veteran presence on a team still finding its identity. Milwaukee's bet on Caris LeVert is the most interesting one to track. If last season's dip was mostly about fit and role in Detroit rather than actual decline, LeVert could be a real value add. If it was closer to a permanent decline at 31, this becomes a quiet miss buried inside a much bigger trade that nobody will remember by name a year from now. Detroit is arguably the biggest long-term winner here, and it has almost nothing to do with the players themselves. 2 banked trade exceptions worth a combined $20.2 million, preserved bird rights on Huerter, and an intact mid-level exception used immediately on Isaiah Joe. That's a front office that used this trade primarily as a tool-building exercise, and by that measure, it worked exactly as designed. Whether LeVert or Collins ever become household names in Detroit almost doesn't matter to how this specific piece of the puzzle gets graded. Memphis and Dallas are the hardest to grade right now, simply because Isaiah Stewart and Santi Aldama are role players whose value depends entirely on fit within rotations that are still being finalized heading into the season. Neither piece is likely to be the headline of this trade a year from now, but both give their new teams useful depth at positions they needed to address. 2 years from now, this trade probably won't be remembered as a single event with a clear winner and loser. It'll be remembered, if at all, as a case study in how modern NBA front offices use complexity itself as a competitive advantage, turning one player's simple decision to go home into an opportunity for 5 other teams to quietly solve problems most fans never even knew they had. So here's my question for you. Out of all 6 teams involved in this trade, who do you think actually won it? Washington, getting their familiar veteran back? Milwaukee, betting on a change of scenery for LeVert? Or Detroit, quietly stacking trade tools for later in the season? Drop your pick in the comments, and I'll pin the best argument. And if you want breakdowns like this on every confusing trade the NBA throws at us this season, make sure you're subscribed, because there's always another one coming.